Hello, welcome to Matter of Fact. It's always good to have your company. It's not surprising that the Prime Minister has chosen Queensland for his first electioneering bus trip. The state has 11 federal seats with a margin of less than 4%. Now, the road trip began yesterday in Brisbane and will finish in Mackay on Thursday. Along the way, Queenslanders will get a big dose of a fair dinkum. Prime Minister having a bet, eating a pie and listening to some homegrown Aussie rock. Michelle Levine, the personal does matter though, doesn't it? I mean, when you're doing polling, we see polling that shows how the parties are travelling, and then we see polling that shows how the leaders are travelling, and they're head-to-head between, you know, whether it be Malcolm Turnbull and Bill Shorten or now Scott Morrison and Bill Shorten. If you're comparing Malcolm Turnbull and Scott Morrison, particularly for a crucial state like Queensland, what do you see?
Can I say the personal matters, but this election will be fought on economic issues. The issues that Queenslanders are concerned about are really economic issues. Now, it may be that Malcolm Turnbull was the man for Wentworth and inherently wasn't really a Queensland person, and perhaps Scott Morrison hasn't yet proven himself not to be a Queensland person. But I think it's really critical. This will be fought on economic issues. It
mattered enough, though, if I could just come in there, it mattered enough that the failure at the Longman by-election, the problem that Malcolm Turnbull had really getting any purchase in Queensland, it mattered enough that they would look to someone like Peter Dutton, that was behind what eventually saw the overthrow of Malcolm Turnbull. So if you talk about not being a Queensland person, Queensland's got to be a critical state, and while we say policy is important, and we'll come to policy, it did matter enough, Michelle, to be one of the critical factors in overthrowing Malcolm Turnbull, didn't it?
Yes and no. You know, the by-election that actually saw a 3.7% swing on a two-party basis against the LNP was probably the reason that Malcolm Turnbull, why the leadership changed. There's no question about that. But if you look at Longman, you have to look at that electorate and understand the people in that electorate. These people were sort of a lower socioeconomic status than Malcolm Turnbull. It's not like Canberra. It's the antithesis of Canberra. These are real people who are actually struggling a bit economically. They're quite frustrated that people in Canberra are spending a lot of money, earning a lot of money. These people aren't foodies. All the discussion about food and avocados and things like that, that just doesn't resonate with these people. It is about prices. It is about economics. And above all, it's about jobs. It's about, you know, Longman has 2.5 times the unemployment rate of any other of the nation. So it's unemployment, underemployment, and a sense that things like coal and things that would help the economy for them are actually being shunned by people in Canberra who don't get it. So I don't know that it's personal as much as simply politicians not getting it in their view.
Michelle, what do you put this down to? Just listening to what Steve had to say there, and there is no doubt that there has been a swing away from the two major parties. If you look at the crossbenchers in the Senate, you look at the independents in the House of Representatives, the recent election, by-election in Wentworth, that people are looking beyond the two major parties. But Steve says there our economy is built on straw. Well, we've had 25 plus years of uninterrupted economic growth. If you look at Australia's economic story compared to other parts of the world, it's been a miracle, many people have seen. That why then are we seeing, with strong underpinnings of our economy, jobs being created, that we're seeing dissatisfaction, disaffection with the two major parties?
I think what we're seeing is that on average Australians are doing really well. We're wealthier than ever before. Incomes are outstripping costs better than anywhere else. If you hear that and you feel and you know that you yourself and your family aren't actually better off, if you're the group that's left behind, that is more irritating than if you heard that everyone was struggling. So I think what average people are actually feeling is that both parties are almost talking academically. They're actually talking about economics in an academic way. They're talking about the environment in an academic way. And definitely in Queensland, overall, you're actually having people who are thinking about themselves, their families, their local area, and they're not really that interested in the global economics of things. They're really focused on the things that matter to them, their local community and their family. And I think what that does is leaves the door open for a local legend to step in and say, I'm with you, I get it, and I'm going to stand for you. And I doubt that they're really going to bother to learn the voting system to make sure that they get their preferences sorted out. You know, we can all hope that people learn something and do the right thing. That's not the way it will work. They will actually vote, you know, number one for somebody that they feel will stand for them. How that plays out in terms of who wins at the next federal election is anybody's guess.
To what extent are you seeing that shift mirrored more broadly, that people are saying, well, these issues matter enough for me to vote on, even if that doesn't directly affect my life or directly impact on my particular electorate? These are conscience, values, moral issues that are important enough for me to vote or potentially switch my vote on.
Sure. I think one of the things we have to remember is Wentworth is so very different to most of the areas in Queensland. And it's important that we don't think of Queensland as a homogeneous group. It just isn't. There are some parts of Queensland that are just as trendy and cool and arts hubby as Melbourne, the centre of the arts. So there are some parts of Queensland just like that. But the main bulk of Queensland is not anti-gay people. It's not as deeply conservative as we sort of tend to think. When I looked at all of the data that we've collected by surveying people all over Queensland, in fact all over Australia, I was really surprised to see not only is it not full of retirees, it's actually young. Queensland is younger than the rest of Australia. So there's a lot of youth there, there's a lot of, therefore, Green voters, there's a lot of support for things like gay marriage and gay couples adopting children. All of those sorts of issues come with youth. So it's not that rusted on, deeply conservative, old bloke thing that we might think of as outsiders. It's definitely changing. Would Queensland stand up and vote like I think the people of Wentworth would for gay marriage? I don't think so. I think they wouldn't say that's the most important issue facing the state of Queensland. Whereas in Wentworth, it may well have been top of mind and very, very important. I think what this time now we're seeing in Queensland is that when people are economically finding it difficult, when they're actually finding prices problematic and they're having to think about the price of everything and think about whether they can get insured or not and decide that insurance is a luxury. When people are in that state of mind, the thing that they will vote on is not gay marriage. The thing they will vote on is something that will ensure that they can get jobs, that their children can get jobs, and that they can be fully employed, not just employed in kind of part-time bits and pieces. I think that's what will really drive them.
Michelle, looking at Queensland and looking what the polling is telling us, how do you see that breaking at the next federal election? And does it mean that seats such as Peter Dutton's in Dixon, for instance, come into play, that potentially these are seats that could be lost?
There's a number of seats in Queensland that are really marginal for the LNP. And, if the swing was the same as we saw in the recent by-election, then most of those seats would actually be lost. But what actually happens by May, and I think it's probably going to be May, there's a lot can happen in that time. There's a whole lot can happen in that time. My guess is that there will be a lot of independent and other candidates standing, unless the major parties can actually really speak to the people. And as we were saying before, these minor parties or other parties really can't lead the chase. They really can't achieve a whole lot, but they can stop a lot of things. And unfortunately in Queensland, if people are frustrated enough with the LNP and Labor, and particularly Labor and the unions, which they would see as stopping people create jobs and stopping people get jobs in the first place, they will just want any independent to stop all of that.
And as you say, that's where the protest factor comes in and people looking beyond those two major parties. Terrific conversation. I'm glad you could all join us. Michelle, thank you. And good to see you. And Steve, always good to have you on the program. Thank you.
Thanks, Stan.
Very much, Stan.
God bless you, mate.